Hello, hello. Today we have our part 2 of the Fantasy Cosmetica collection that I got. So this is the second palette of the 3 that I bought. This is the Fighter palette. And once again, I just really love the artwork on these pieces, on these palettes. And I feel like the artwork just all kind of just conjoins together and almost kind of like tells a story. So this is, here's all the background information and all that. And of course the name is on top again. We have the Fighter. There's, just looking at it from the outside, I think of, there's something about this that kind of reminds me of like this show called like Avatar: The Last Airbender, I think. It's like a cartoon show, and it's kind of what the vibes are giving me right now, initially. So again, just a slip-on. When I saw this palette, it's pretty recently new. I think it might have come out last fall, or maybe it was like the end of last summer or something. Definitely came out within like the past year, I believe. When I saw this palette and I saw how much people were enjoying it, I was like, okay, I'll buy it. So I started looking into this brand because of this palette. This palette kind of, it didn't really look like anything I'd seen before, color story wise, and it got me interested. So I was like, alright, I'll check it out. I checked it out during their Black Friday sales. I got 3 palettes. Go check out that first review of Fantasy Cosmetica that I did. But this one is for the Fighter, so let's look inside. So in here, once again, we have a mirror. There's a small mirror in there. And then there's just artwork that goes all the way around. And then this is the color story that we are working with. There's something from this color story that kind of reminds me of ColourPop came up with their color story for like The Mandalorian. And this color story kind of reads Star Wars to me in a way. After looking at the color story, there's something about these shades that just reminds me of Star Wars. But then also, I watched Dune in theaters recently, and I really think this is almost like the perfect Dune palette. Dune takes place basically in kind of like a desert planet. There's a lot of sand. So you have all these browns in here, and then you have these shades over here that are also kind of blue. And there's like a specific, I guess, race of people who have like blue eyes. And that's kind of what these shades over here remind me of. And I guess this one's kind of looks, it's more like a purple gray, it looks like, in the palette. But this is the color story. I really did like the color story for this palette. But let's get into the nitty gritty. So overall, what did I think about this story, this palette? I am greatly disappointed because I bought this palette because I was so interested in it, and I bought the other palettes because of this palette. Like, this was like the main palette. This is the color story that I really loved, and I really love the artwork. I was like, that looks so interesting, and it just did not perform. It didn't dazzle me in any way. Let's start with the mattes. This warrior shade in here is supposed to be the darkest shade, and it really wasn't that dark. I think that's my main complaint. It's kind of like a gray purple, and I just could not get it to be that dark. I kept adding and adding, and I couldn't get it to be the shade that I wanted. My least favorite shade in here is also this Might shade in here. It looks like a purple, like a dark, deep purple with some gold sparkle in there. And once applied on my eye, it just, you can see a lot better on my hand, but on my eye, it just looked like a brown. It just kind of looks brown. You don't really see too much of the purple shift on the eyes. You definitely see the gold, and it's like, okay, and that's not too bad, but I really wanted to see this as a deep purple with a gold shift, and that just did not translate to my eyes. I love yellow. Yellow is my favorite color. Got my yellow nails on right now for this past Easter, and so this is beautiful mustard in here. I'm like, ooh, I love a yellow. Y'all know I love a yellow. But when I put it on my eyelid, it looks less yellow and more of a brown with a kind of yellowish hue to it. But on my eye, blended out, I mean, you kind of see it here. It ends up turning more into like a camel color, like a camel brown. And it's not as a yellow mustard as I thought it was going to be. So that was also kind of a letdown. This Cavalier color in here ended up being a lot lighter on my skin tone than I thought it was going to be. Marshall was fine. It's just no, standard brown. Didn't think of anything of it. These 3 we have right here. Once again, these 3 I could not pick up with a brush. Even when I wet the brush, it would not pick up on a brush. I had to use my fingers, and there was nothing outstanding about these colors. Maybe someone out there would absolutely fall in love with these 3 shades here in the middle, but I just didn't think there was anything that stood out about it. Let's do this Ferber. They're pretty. I mean, they're pretty colors, and so I had to use my fingers once again. They're pretty and they have nice shimmer, but as a person who loves color, like, these are pretty, but they're just kind of neutral colors, and I'm just kind of sitting here thinking, I feel like I have a palette that probably works a lot better with a brush where I don't have to dip my fingers into it. That's just kind of my one thing. And if I'm not in love with it, then, you know, there's no point in me keeping it. If you don't have an issue working your fingers into this palette and you're like, that's the perfect color story for me, I think you'd like it. I think there's one shade I haven't talked about yet, and it's this Glory shade right here. It's I guess you could call it maybe a duochrome. This shade saved this entire palette. It's the only shade in here, and it's also, again, being I think a duochrome, I kind of give it some leeway, but in this case, this shade did pick up with a brush. This shade, I was also able to apply with my fingers. Like, it worked fine with a brush, and I didn't even have to wet my brush. Like, it worked fine. And like I've said before, with duochromes, I kind of give a leeway, because I'm like, well, they're not really shimmers, so I expect them to perform a little differently. But in this case, this duochrome worked a lot better than these shimmers that are up here. Like, these look pretty and dandy, you know, when you use your finger, but I'm really trying not to use my finger. And so here, when I use my finger, the way it applies on my finger is also the way it applies on the eyes. And I just think it is so pretty. And it's like I said before, it's those shades that I love where it has like a brown kind of base, and then it sparkles blue. I think that is so pretty. Of this entire palette, I would steal this shade. I did 3 different looks with this palette. And this Glory shade, I used it twice because I needed to save the look twice. It was too neutral for me, and there's nothing wrong with a neutral look. I like a neutral look occasionally, but I just like to be able to pick up, you know, my eyeshadows with my brush. I did my first look with these 3, and it was just so underwhelming. I wasn't really happy with the look, so I ended up coming into Glory and putting that on my eyelid, and then I felt satisfied with my look. But I was just kind of overall, I wasn't really excited. Like, I was just kind of expecting to see a bigger impact. I don't know. There was something about this palette initially that I was so excited about, and that excitement kind of left after I actually applied it on my skin. So I don't know if it's just an issue with like my skin tone. Maybe it doesn't look as nice because of my undertones or something. But I just did not have a fun time with this palette, except for this shade. This shade I would steal. Everything else in here, I'm kind of like, I feel like either I already do, or eventually I will find, you know, a pretty burgundy shimmer, or like this kind of coppery shimmer. Like, I feel like I could just grab, you know, a ColourPop palette, and a ColourPop palette would have similar shades like these 3, and it would work a lot better because I could also pick it up on a brush, and I think they might actually last longer. I think these lasted pretty much the standard time, but like I said, I used this shade out of 2 of the 3 looks, and using this shade, it really did just enhance the look so much more. And but using this shade, it didn't really crease on me at all. So it's hard to say what the actual lasting time is of all these shades, because 2 of the 3 looks I used this shade, because this to me was the superior shade in here. So overall, can I recommend this palette? That one's a little difficult, because I feel like for this palette specifically, it's not necessarily that the palette itself was bad. I just don't think this ended up being the color story that would excite me as it would have. I think that overall, like I said, if you don't really have an issue using your fingers, which I got a comment, I think it was from Kelly before, she's like, girl, I don't mind using my fingers. So if you don't have a problem with that, go ahead, be my guest. I didn't really like this, but I can't for sure say whether or not I recommend it. I think that if this is the palette that you're looking for, it's going to work great. For me, it did not work that well, but I absolutely love this shade. This shade here makes this palette very redeemable to me. I think this is more of a neutral palette, because even like this Blade shade over here, it's not super intensely like, it's still a very calmed down kind of blue-gray. So this feels a lot more subdued than I think maybe I'm used to. That could be a part of the reason why. So I think if you want to try this brand with a more subdued color story, this might be the palette for you. Thank you so much for watching this review. I hope I answered all the questions you might have with this. This isn't the color story for me, but it could be the color story for you. So I hope you'll have a great day.